I remember standing there in my study, the glow of the monitor illuminating stacks of credit card statements, and realizing I was looking at the end of my engagement. It wasn't a sudden burst of anger, but a cold, hard clarity that settled deep in my bones. My fiancée, Bianca, had just told my 11-year-old daughter, Chloe, that she was the problem in our relationship. And in that moment, I knew I had to choose. Not between Chloe and Bianca, but between protecting my child and clinging to a fantasy. What unfolded next was a calculated breakup, one built on documentation, uncomfortable truths, and the stark reality that some people only show their true colors when money is on the line. My name's Marcus. I'm 37, and I've been a single dad to Chloe since she was just 6 years old. Her mom, Sarah, lost her battle with cancer, and those first 2 years after Sarah passed were brutal. Just Chloe and me, trying to navigate life without the person who held us together. Learning to cook meals that didn't come from a box. Figuring out how to braid hair for school pictures. Sitting through every single parent-teacher conference alone, while other couples whispered about the widower who couldn't even fold his kids' gym clothes properly. Then, about 2 years ago, I met Bianca at a work conference. She was funny, sharp, worked from home doing freelance marketing. For the first year, everything seemed perfect. She'd join us for weekend breakfasts, laugh at Chloe's jokes about her math teacher, even helped pick out a new backpack for the school year. So, when I proposed last spring, it felt like we were finally becoming a real family again. Bianca moved into my house 3 months after we got engaged. And that's when I started noticing the cracks. Small things at first, like how she'd suddenly have headphones on the second Chloe got home from Oakwood Elementary. Or how she'd schedule urgent calls right around dinner time, even though she completely controlled her own hours. Our dinner schedule was simple. Chloe ate at 6 o'clock because she had soccer practice at 7:30 twice a week. I worked outside the home with unpredictable hours, and Bianca was on her laptop in the spare bedroom with total flexibility. I found myself doing all the cooking. Breakfast before I left for work, packing Chloe's lunch, prepping dinner ingredients in the morning so I could throw something together fast when I got home. When I mentioned it to Bianca, she just shrugged and said she wasn't much of a cook anyway. But here's the thing that really started bothering me: Bianca didn't just refuse to cook for Chloe. She refused to cook for me, too. Every single time I suggested maybe she could help out with meals since she was home all day, she'd hit me with the same line about how that was my kid and therefore my responsibility. Like making a grilled cheese for an 11-year-old was some massive burden she never signed up for. 3 weeks ago, I got stuck in traffic on Highway 101. Construction had the whole thing down to 1 lane, and I was watching the clock tick closer to 6 o'clock, knowing Chloe would be getting hungry. I called Bianca, kept my voice calm and reasonable. Just asked if she could throw some pasta on the stove or warm up the leftover chicken from last night. Nothing complicated, literally just making sure my kid ate something hot instead of cereal for dinner. She told me she was working, even though I could hear Netflix in the background. When I pushed back gently, she snapped that she didn't sign up to be Chloe's mother. Then she hit me with the line that's been playing in my head ever since: "She's your kid. She's your problem." And hung up on me. I sat there in bumper-to-bumper traffic, hands shaking on the steering wheel, and called Chloe instead just to check on her. My daughter, my sweet 11-year-old kid, who'd already lost her mom and spent years watching me struggle to fill that gap, answered the phone, cheerful as ever, and told me, "It's okay, Dad. I made myself a peanut butter sandwich." Then she asked if I was all right because she could hear the stress in my voice. I got home 90 minutes later to find Chloe doing homework at the kitchen table, crumbs from her sad little sandwich still on her plate. Bianca sat on the couch with a glass of wine and her laptop, not even looking up when I walked in. I didn't say anything that night. Just quietly made Chloe a proper dinner with vegetables and protein, sat with her while she told me about her science project, then tucked her in and read 2 chapters of the book we'd been working through. The whole time I kept thinking about how Bianca had been home the entire afternoon, had walked past Chloe probably a dozen times, and couldn't be bothered to put a frozen pizza in the oven for a kid who never asked for anything and always said please and thank you. That was the moment I started really paying attention to the pattern. How Bianca would literally step over Chloe's backpack in the hallway instead of moving it. How she'd schedule her fitness club time exactly when Chloe needed a ride to soccer and I was in meetings. How she'd suddenly need to make an urgent work call whenever Chloe asked for help with homework, even though Google could have answered it in 10 seconds. I started testing it. Little things, like mentioning that Chloe had a game on Saturday and watching Bianca immediately plan a girls' day with her sister. Or asking if she could pick up Chloe from school one day when I had to work late and hearing about how her schedule was just too packed, even though I'd seen her Instagram story from that same afternoon showing her getting a manicure. The breaking point wasn't just about food or rides or homework, though. It was about what Bianca said during those moments when she thought she was being reasonable and logical. Every single time I brought up the fact that we were supposed to be building a life together, that being a step-parent meant actually parenting sometimes, she'd counter with how she was my partner and not Chloe's replacement mother. Like those were mutually exclusive things. Like loving me meant she got to completely opt out of caring about the most important person in my world. I tried having a real conversation about it one Saturday morning after Chloe left for a sleepover at her best friend's house. I sat Bianca down with coffee and asked her straight up what she saw our future looking like, what role she planned to play in Chloe's life once we were married. She looked at me like I'd asked her to solve calculus and said, "Marcus, I agreed to be your wife. I didn't agree to raise someone else's kid." And that phrase, someone else's kid, when talking about Chloe, it just hit different. Like my daughter was some random neighbor child and not the person who'd be living in our house until she graduated high school. I realized right then that this wasn't about Bianca being overwhelmed or needing time to adjust. This was about her fundamental view of Chloe as an obstacle to the life she wanted, a problem she hadn't agreed to take on. Baggage that came with the package she actually wanted. That night, after Bianca went to bed, I sat in my study looking at our finances. Really looking at them for the first time in months. And I started adding up numbers that made my stomach turn. The biggest mistake here wasn't trusting Bianca initially. It was ignoring consistent behavior patterns for 3 months after she moved in. When someone shows you through repeated actions that they view your child as an inconvenience rather than a person, that's not a communication problem. That's a values problem. And it doesn't get better with time. The financial picture I uncovered that night made everything crystal clear in the worst possible way. Over the past 6 months, Bianca had racked up almost $18,000 on the credit cards I'd added her to after we got engaged. Designer clothes from Saks Fifth Avenue. Daily Pete's coffee runs that somehow cost $40 a pop. Spa days with her sister every other week. Furniture for the study I'd given her that she barely used. And here's the kicker, a $3,000 handbag she bought the same week she told Chloe that driving her to soccer practice wasn't her responsibility. I sat there staring at the statements spread across my desk. Doing the math in my head, 18 grand could have paid for Chloe's entire year of activities. Could have funded her college savings account. Could have covered the family vacation I'd been planning to take all 3 of us on next summer. But instead, it went to a woman who couldn't be bothered to heat up leftovers for my kid. The pattern became impossible to ignore after that. Bianca would refuse to help with the simplest tasks involving Chloe. Wouldn't pick up her prescriptions from the pharmacy, even though it was on her way home from the fitness club. Wouldn't sign a permission slip for a field trip when I was in back-to-back meetings. Wouldn't even grab Chloe's favorite cereal at the grocery store when she was literally already there buying herself organic juice and fancy cheese. Every single time I brought it up, she'd give me the same response about how this was my child and therefore my responsibility. But she had zero problem treating my bank account like it was our shared responsibility. I tried talking to her about it one evening after Chloe went to bed. Kept my tone calm and constructive. Explained that partnership meant actually being partners in all aspects of life, including the kid who came with me. Bianca just rolled her eyes and told me she was my partner as a wife, not as a substitute parent. That she'd signed up to build a life with me, but Chloe already had a parent, and that was my job to handle. I asked her point blank what she thought being a step-parent meant, what she imagined our family would look like after we got married. And she actually said that she figured Chloe would go to college in a few years anyway, so it wasn't really a long-term issue we needed to solve. My daughter was 11 years old, and this woman was already counting down the days until she could pretend Chloe didn't exist. The next incident happened on a Thursday afternoon when Oakwood Elementary called because Chloe had thrown up in class and needed to be picked up immediately. I was 2 hours away at a remote facility, physically couldn't leave. So, I called Bianca, who was working from home like always, and asked if she could please just drive 10 minutes to get Chloe. She told me she had a deadline, which would have been reasonable, except I knew for a fact her biggest client had ghosted her a month earlier, and she'd been pretending to work while actually watching reality TV shows all day. I could hear the TV in the background during our call. Could literally hear the Real Housewives theme music, but she still insisted she was too busy to help my sick kid. I ended up calling my brother, who lived 40 minutes away, and he dropped everything to go get Chloe. Spent the rest of the afternoon taking care of her until I could get home. And when I walked in that evening, Bianca didn't even ask how Chloe was feeling. That was the moment something inside me just snapped into place. This cold clarity that I'd been trying to force a relationship with someone who saw my daughter as an inconvenience at best and a burden at worst. I spent the weekend watching Bianca's behavior with this new awareness. Saw how she'd leave rooms when Chloe entered them. How she'd put her headphones in the second Chloe started talking about her day. How she'd schedule her entire life to avoid any possible interaction with an 11-year-old kid who just wanted to feel like she had a family again. Monday morning, I called the credit card companies and canceled every single card I'd added Bianca to. Didn't give her a warning. Didn't have a discussion about it. Just cut off her access to my money the same way she'd cut off any responsibility for my child. She found out around noon when her card got declined at some boutique uptown. Called me absolutely screaming about financial mistreatment and how I'd embarrassed her in front of the sales staff and how dare I make decisions about our finances without consulting her. I let her finish her rant and then said very calmly, "My daughter isn't your problem, remember? Well, then your credit card bills aren't mine." And the silence on the other end of that call was absolutely deafening. She tried arguing that we were partners and partners shared resources. So, I reminded her that partners also shared responsibilities, including the one she'd been very vocal about not wanting. Bianca showed up at my office an hour later, mascara running, doing this whole performance about how she didn't understand where this was coming from and how we needed to communicate better. But I just showed her the spreadsheet I'd made with every single time she'd refused to help Chloe next to every charge she'd made on my cards. $18,000 in 6 months while she couldn't spare 30 minutes to take my kid to soccer practice. Couldn't manage to order pizza when I was stuck at work. Couldn't find it in herself to care about a child who'd already lost one parent. The change in Bianca's behavior was immediate and absolutely transparent. Suddenly, she was offering to make dinner every night. Asking Chloe about her homework. Volunteering to drive her to practice. Even suggested a girls' day at the mall together, which Chloe looked absolutely confused about since Bianca had never shown interest before. I watched this performance play out over the next week. Bianca playing the role of devoted stepmother-to-be, posting photos with Chloe on her Instagram with captions about blended family life. Making elaborate breakfasts that, honestly, Chloe didn't even like because Bianca had never bothered to learn what foods my kid actually enjoyed. The whole thing was so obviously fake. So clearly motivated by wanting her access to money back rather than any genuine affection for Chloe. And it made me angrier than the original neglect had. At least before she'd been honest about not caring. Now she was using my daughter as a prop in her campaign to get her credit cards back. I started paying closer attention to how Bianca interacted with Chloe during this sudden transformation. Noticed how forced her smiles were. How she'd check her phone constantly while pretending to help with homework. How she'd suggest activities that were really just shopping trips where she could hint about things she wanted to buy. One night, I overheard her on the phone with her sister, talking about how she just needed to keep up the act until I calmed down and reinstated her cards. How it was ridiculous that she had to pretend to care about some kid just to access what should be her money anyway since we were practically married. That conversation told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a woman who'd made mistakes and wanted to change. This was someone who fundamentally saw my daughter as an obstacle between her and the lifestyle she wanted. And no amount of fake dinners or forced smiles would ever change that core truth about who she was. This is textbook financial manipulation meeting parental neglect. And the key lesson is that sudden behavioral changes after losing access to resources aren't growth. They're strategy. Real change comes from genuine remorse and consistent effort over time, not from performative affection the moment consequences hit. I knew I had to end things with Bianca, but I wanted to do it strategically. Wanted to make sure I had everything documented because something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be a clean break. I started screenshotting her text messages, the ones where she complained to her friends about having to deal with my baggage. Saved the credit card statements with all her charges highlighted. Even set up security cameras around the house, including one that covered the hallway leading to my study after she made some comment about how the house was technically half hers now since we were engaged. That last part turned out to be more valuable than I ever imagined because 2 days later, I caught her on camera going through my study, photographing financial documents, looking through files about the house deed and my investment accounts. Clearly building some kind of case for why she deserved a payout when this relationship ended. I consulted with a lawyer that week, explained the whole situation, showed him the evidence I'd gathered, and he told me straight up that I needed to get her out of my house before she could establish any kind of tenancy claim or common law argument. The lawyer also suggested I document any interaction she had with Chloe, just in case Bianca tried to claim she'd been acting as a parental figure and deserved some kind of custody consideration, which seemed insane until he explained that he'd seen messier situations than mine. I went home that night planning to have the breakup conversation over the weekend. Give her a week to move out. Keep everything civil for Chloe's sake. But then something happened that made me throw that whole plan out the window. Chloe came to me after school on Friday, wouldn't look me in the eye, and finally whispered that Bianca had told her the reason we were having problems was because being a stepmom was harder than Bianca expected, and maybe if Chloe could stay at her grandparents' house more often, things would be easier. My 11-year-old daughter was standing there trying not to cry, basically asking if she was the reason my relationship was falling apart, and I felt something inside me just go ice cold. I asked Chloe what exactly Bianca had said, and my kid told me that Bianca had explained how adult relationships need space, and sometimes kids don't understand that their needs have to come second. That Chloe was old enough now to be more independent, and maybe she should think about going to boarding school in a few years. Bianca had literally told my daughter that she was a problem that needed to be solved, that her existence in her own home was inconvenient, that she should make herself scarce so the adults could have their perfect life. I walked into the living room where Bianca was scrolling through her phone and told her to pack her bags right now, tonight. She needed to be out of my house. She looked up, confused, and tried to play innocent. Asked what had happened and why I was being so dramatic. So, I told her exactly what Chloe had just shared with me. Bianca actually had the nerve to say she was just being honest with Chloe, that kids need to learn the world doesn't revolve around them, that she was trying to help Chloe become more mature and self-sufficient. I told her she had 2 hours to get her essential items and leave. That I'd pack up the rest of her stuff and have it delivered wherever she wanted, but she needed to get out of my house before I said something I'd regret. She tried the crying routine again. The whole performance about how we could work through this, and she'd said things wrong but meant them right, how she loved me and wanted to make our family work. But I was done listening to her manipulation. Bianca switched tactics fast when she realized tears weren't working, suddenly got mean, started yelling about how I was going to regret this, and she'd been supporting me emotionally through single parenthood, and I owed her for the time she'd invested in this relationship. I reminded her that the only thing she'd invested was my money, and she could consider those $18,000 her severance package for the job she never actually did. She left that night screaming threats about lawyers and lawsuits, saying she'd take me for everything I had, that she had rights as my fiancée, and I couldn't just throw her out like garbage. I changed the locks the next morning and installed the camera doorbell because I had a feeling this wasn't over. Bianca started flooding my phone with messages, alternating between begging me to reconsider and threatening legal action. Her family got involved, sending me long texts about how I was making a mistake, and Bianca really loved Chloe deep down and just needed time to adjust to stepmom life. But I didn't respond to any of them and just focused on making sure Chloe understood that none of this was her fault. That she was never a problem and never would be. That any adult who couldn't love her wasn't someone we needed in our lives. The real nightmare started 2 weeks later when Bianca's lawyer sent me a demand letter claiming she was entitled to compensation for her contributions to the household, that she'd been functioning as a domestic partner and caretaker and deserved financial consideration for the dissolution of our relationship. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who actually laughed and said this was one of the weaker claims he'd seen, especially since I had documentation of her actively avoiding any caretaking responsibilities. We filed a counterclaim for the unauthorized charges she'd made on my credit cards, attached all the statements and her text messages about how Chloe wasn't her problem, included the camera footage of her going through my private files without permission. Bianca's case fell apart pretty quickly once discovery started. Turns out she'd been telling her friends and writing about her plan to marry me for financial security and then eventually push for Chloe to live elsewhere so we could have freedom. Her lawyer saw those messages and basically told her she had no case, that if anything, she was lucky I wasn't pursuing criminal charges for theft and unauthorized access to my accounts. We settled out of court. Bianca had to pay back $4,800, which was nowhere near what she'd actually stolen, but my lawyer said getting anything back was a win. And she had to sign an agreement that she'd have no contact with Chloe ever again, which was honestly worth more to me than any money. The judge also issued a restraining order after Bianca showed up at Chloe's school one afternoon trying to talk to her, claiming she just wanted to say goodbye properly, but really trying to manipulate my daughter one last time. That incident got her banned from school property and gave me the legal protection I needed to keep her completely out of our lives. 3 months later and things are finally peaceful again. Chloe's doing better in school now that she doesn't have someone in her house making her feel unwanted. We've got our routines back, and honestly, I'm not even thinking about dating because my focus is exactly where it should be, on being the dad my daughter deserves. This whole experience really drove home why documentation matters in relationships, and why protecting your children should always come before salvaging a partnership with someone who sees them as obstacles. The real victory here wasn't the legal settlement or the restraining order. It was a father choosing his daughter's emotional well-being over his own desire for companionship. Have you ever had to choose between your child's peace and your own happiness?